A few weeks ago, I sat down with published music educator and absolutely demon saxophonist Jordan Ferrin to discuss one of the most important skills a musician can have. We spoke about why it's useful, how we can develop it, and how it can not only help us to learn music, but also learn to improvise. But before we get into any of that, what is this mystery skill? Well, it's something called audiation. I know I'd never heard of it either, but here's how Jordan described it.
Audiation is a main goal of Edwin Gordon's music learning theory, which is a theory that seeks to explain how people learn music.
Okay.
Right? And so basically, audiation is the process by which we give syntactic meaning to music in our minds and our bodies. So syntactic, what does that mean? I basically am talking about syntax, right? We give meaning to words in sentences based off the sentence's syntax.
Okay.
We're not really putting all the letters together. We kind of, the meaning of this sentence as I'm speaking it.
Okay.
Because of the syntax.
Yeah,
right?
okay.
And so the same thing happens with notes and, melodic or rhythmic patterns in music. We give meaning to music based off of music syntax.
Now, admittedly, that explanation did take me a little bit of time to get my head around, but basically, Jordan's just saying that when we speak, we can't put the words in a random order and expect it to make sense. I are hungry, have because banana might I'm, doesn't mean anything at all. You've got to put the words in the right order. I might have a banana because I'm hungry. And music is the exact same. We've got to put the notes and rhythms into recognizable patterns for it to sound like it makes sense. If we don't, the music's not going to make people feel anything at all. Don't believe me? Well, here's how Jordan proved that we all recognize and almost want to hear certain patterns. Do-do-do-do-do-do.
Yes, exactly, man. Exactly. So you, and I think everybody else listening, predicted that pretty accurately.
Okay.
Right? As soon as I stopped playing, in your minds and bodies, you were like, oh, ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Audiation is like the top level of the process of audiation is predicting music to come. It's that expectation, right?
Okay.
That's something that's so familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's so familiar, we automatically like, oh, ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
But this doesn't just happen with melodies. We have the same connection to rhythm and harmony. There are some patterns that are so ingrained in our musical psyche, we not only want to hear them, it's almost uncomfortable when we don't. That chord really wants to resolve, and it almost feels uncomfortable until...
Right? So that's what we're expecting.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think everybody is familiar with, even if they're not a musician.
And really, although audiation is this large, complicated concept, the main thing that I took away from the conversation was breaking music down into little patterns that you recognize, so you can learn those and ultimately make them meaningful to you. And this is so useful for learning music or learning to improvise. If you've learnt a lick or a pattern or just a general sound deeply enough that you can easily recognize it, you're going to have so much more freedom when you use it yourself. You can improvise with it, slightly alter it, play it in different places, respond when other people play it. You've got so many more options than if you just learnt the notes off by heart and stopped there. Jordan was kind enough to demonstrate a lick he's been working on and how he used this process to make it part of his musical vocabulary and not just a fancy lick he can use to show off.
1, 2, 3, 4. Right? First of all, we've established, okay, let's maybe get the rhythms, right? We're hearing macro beats and maybe some sort of a tonal center, but let's focus on the macro beats and the important rhythms that we're getting.
Macro beats is basically just a fancy word for pulse. But anyway, back to Jordan. 2, 3, 4.
I think a lot of us are latching onto those triplets. Ba, ba ba ba. You know, that triplet thing is very strong, and especially the triplets leading into ba 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 ba.
Yeah.
Right. It's that kind of a thing. But then we need to start audiating. You know, we've got the important rhythmic patterns, but now we have to do the important tonal patterns. So let's do this. This is all over kind of a minor 2-5-1 leading to B minor. It's got that sound in our heads. Yeah. So let me play this line over this rubato. Okay. So in order to start hearing those tonal patterns and rhythmic patterns that are most important to you, start with the first note, the highest note, and the last note to give yourself a sense of kind of the contour of the line. So I would start, you know, with the first major pitch, which is here. So let me play that line, 3, 4. So it starts here, ends here. Yeah. So, and in between that, we can use those as reference points to therefore start filling in the rest of the pitches. For me, what really helped is latching onto the ba, 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 ba.
Sure.
So, and those triplets form an augmented line. Check this out. Okay. And so when I was learning this line in a few different keys, I made sure to pick out the most important tonal pattern for myself, and that was that augmented thing.
Okay.
And so that really helped me out. So then when I went to another key, I'm like, oh, that augmented thing is there. Okay. And that helped me then get to the next bit of the line, which is this. Which is the fourth and the flat 6 in this particular C sharp minor 9 flat 5 chord. Okay. Here's another very important thing. I mean, you want to listen to the line in full.
Yeah, sure.
Listen to the line in full, but then when you're learning it, break it into chunks.
Yeah.
Break it into chunks. This is insanely important because you can take those chunks and then put them back together. But this particular first chunk is like a chunk that I can use.
And I really can't stress that last point enough. Breaking a line down into chunks will not only help you learn it quicker, but it also gives you loads of other little bits of language you can use. That 2-5-1 lick, well, he can play the whole thing over a 2-5-1 progression. He can take just the first chunk and use it on just a 2 chord. He can take the middle chunk and use it on a 5 chord, or he can take the last chunk and use it on a 1 chord. So that 1-2-5-1 lick gave him 4 different bits of language that he can use. And doing this, your improvisations will sound more natural, more in line with whatever genre you're playing, and you'll have so much more freedom. But the benefits go way beyond just helping us to learn licks or recognize musical patterns. One of the main things that we do as improvisers is try to imitate the greats. We transcribe their solos and learn their licks to get us sounding as close to them as possible. But if you really want to get in line with their sound, you've got to go beyond that. And audiation is so helpful here.
Imitation, right, is something that's obviously what we do. We imitate the greats. We imitate, just a lot of off of records. But you have to do that a lot. But do it explicitly. Do it with mindfulness in your practice time, with mindfulness about where the music is going, so that your body and mind can connect to what you are learning.
And I guess in the context you just mentioned of imitation, you'd be assuming you've transcribed a few solos by one artist, so you can get a sense of what they like to do on 5 chords, right? You might not know exactly everything because whoever can. Yeah. But it's like, oh, I've never once in these 2 or 3 solos heard this person do a tritone substitution, for example. Never once.
Right.
So if I'm trying to imitate them, I am making an active decision within my audiation process to not do the tritone sub that I love and spent 6 months working on. Right? Is that the vibe you're talking about then?
Yeah. And more to that point, you you are getting familiar with this person's musical patterns and vocabulary so much to the point where you are not predicting that they will play a tritone substitution over those things.
Sure, okay.
You are audiating and basically predicting / audiating, this other language that,
Sure.
and what's really cool about this is the more familiar you get with their music, then maybe you'll put on a brand new solo, and then what you're expecting to hear can be audiated or predicted correctly, and you're like, oh, I knew he was going to do that. That
Right.
sounds familiar.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, it's that kind of a thing.
I mean, that's pretty cool, right? Okay, so I think it's pretty clear that audiation is super useful and that we all do it at least a little bit already. But how can we help to improve it? Well, Jordan had 2 main suggestions: listening.
Really, listen to the jazz greats, those really great jazz records, right? Just really have them on all the time so that you're not just, you're getting the style down, which is, of course, inherent in like articulation and feel of eighth notes, all that good stuff. You're getting, you're starting to hear the vocabulary and all that kind of stuff.
And singing.
I'm not a great singer. I am not
a
a great singer, but you definitely want to be at a keyboard, first of all,
I would say with that as well, because the reality is keyboards are quite a luxury to have.
That is
as in
true.
A physical keyboard, like the one you've got.
But if you've got some sort of just a little app on your phone or your iPad,
exactly,
that will really help you to start singing.
And when you're singing bits of your practice, you can focus on little chunks, just like we mentioned earlier.
Right, and then from there, I'm starting to latch on to those most important tonal and rhythmic patterns. Oh, that augmented thing is really cool. Right. So really, really have a sense of the entire chunk, and then
by making sure you're singing any licks, patterns, scales, whatever it is you're working on, you're really going to make sure that those sounds get into your head. You're going to recognize them, they'll mean something to you, and as Jordan would say, you can audiate them. And it's really easy to include listening and singing into your practice time. So before you know it, your audiation is going to be so much better, and your general musicianship is going to skyrocket. Now, if you want to read Jordan's article or check out some of his music, there are links down in the description. And to hear our whole conversation, where we go into a lot more depth and also talk about a couple of gig horror stories, check out this video next.